So welcome. This is Laura Jane, or LJ. I'm letting myself be called even more these days. And I'm here with one of my favorite people who I love to be with and learn from these days, Stephanie Bradley. Do you want to say hi, Stephanie?
Hello. So nice to be here with you. I love you so much. It's amazing.
And I'm glad you mentioned that word, love, because that is certainly why we're doing this, right?
Yeah.
Because we are learning so much about love and all the varieties of it. And how love is like a journey, right?
Absolutely. So many tabs. So many tabs.
Yes, we're offering this to the world and to you who are here listening. Thank you so much for wanting to be here to listen, whatever brought you here. And so we're calling this, for now, something along the lines of a chance to look at resolving our love wounds and what that might mean and bring up and involve. So, what are some of the first things that come up through you, Stephanie? I feel like I want to turn it right over to you to see what comes through and just resolving our love wounds. Like, what is that word wound, maybe? Like, are we all wounded? What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. I think every single person has wounds. You know, we pick them up through life, along the journey and through the paths. And the way that we heal, if we heal, has so much bearing on the way we connect with others in life, you know, in every relationship. So learning how to heal oneself as best as we can, and where to seek healing, I think is so important. And you know, if you break an arm, you're gonna have it reset by someone who knows how to set a broken arm. You're not gonna just let it go, because it's gonna leave you crippled. So in that aspect, I think seeking out healing by whatever way works for you personally is one of the greatest gifts we can give to ourselves and to our relationship.
And so I love, actually, that helps me see that that's what we're hoping this can be for us and anyone who might join us for this conversation and what comes through, in that it can be a source of healing for all of us in various ways, in whatever little pieces might do that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, starting with the place, as we're talking about it also kind of, you know, where it's ever-growing and evolving in the way that it goes from wounds to scars to healed spaces. And rather than coming from the negativity of, oh, we're wounded and we need to get fixed, well, yes, we do. But we also are perfectly imperfect. And psyche reacts to trauma, and it's normal. And we're all normal. And sometimes we're doing abnormal things that harm us and cause love wounds to others. So in you know, addressing this head on, I think the way that it connects so much with our other relationships is that it stops us from wounding others and doing that constant bounce back of hurt, you know, that we find in the journey of relationships.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, and that really gives us our why, for why to resolve our love wounds. Like, right there's one of the greatest reasons is so that we don't pass it on or create more of that in the world, you know, with the people that we love or the people that we even barely know, right?
Absolutely.
And so that is the reason to do it for our, because it almost starts to sound like a privilege conversation, like, oh, even those of us who've had such privileged lives, we have these love wounds, and like, oh, what's the value in looking at that? But it's like, wow, that's actually, though, how we can help, is to get through and realize that. And it really builds the compassion, too, right, to realize we all have our love wounds, even those of us who had great, quote-unquote, families and all the privileges in the world came out with love wounds, because maybe that's just inherent to love, that there's a possibility to get wounded even when people are doing things in the name of love, right? That there can still be a wounding aspect. But, yeah, I love that it builds the compassion that we've all got these wounds, and that it's a privilege to look at what our wounds are and deal with it, but there's a really good reason to do that, right? Because otherwise we actually for sure are probably going to pass it on, whether it be in how we raise our kids or how we are in our partnerships or how we even do business or how we are with our neighbors or with our government that right, on so many levels. So, wow, powerful work.
I would say that those of us who have more privilege in life have an even greater obligation to deal with these things, because we have access. We simply have access to that which can help us to heal ourselves. We can do things like go to a yoga co-op community. We have that within that. We have access to therapy. Many of us have access to therapy, not everyone, but, those different means of things that maybe, it might look like we're looking at it simply, oh, you need to heal your loved ones, and that's what's important to you, but it's so important what you put out into the world. When you reference back to, say, the 4 agreements, which I think are just phenomenal for life in general, but what you put out into the world is so important. It's either helping or it's poisoning, and it's simply either one. You could do something that harms, or you could do something for the greater good. So the way that we use our words and the way that we treat others, well, that's so highly affected by whether or not we're frightened, traumatized, depressed, anxious. Any of these things are going to impact the way we interact with the world, So
yes.
When I'm going out into the world, when you're going out into the world, you in particular are a pretty sunshiny human being who passes on love. You pass a lot of love on into the world, and that's a beautiful thing. You give it to me. That makes me feel loved and happy, and I give that to someone else, and in turn that continues. That could go the same way with me being a jerk.
Yeah.
It's going to trigger that in someone else who maybe will take that out on another person. And that's a simple version of it, but it really is the greater good, Like that camping trip that we went on recently, you and I. There was, at my campsite, those 2 different water sources connecting and meeting and turning into a stronger, different path. And that path led to the ocean, which led to distant shores. It touches the world at large. And like those streams, we do the same thing with what we put out into the world. And
wow.
I know, that camping trip, man.
Yeah, right. And even interesting how, for me, various triggers came up through that. And then I think what's interesting here, too, is how you're bringing up, and I think what we're bringing up with this idea of resolving our love wounds, and that the way we feel is affecting the world, and that maybe we're bringing together all the psychology over the last hundreds of years that, yes, basically we know how we feel and how we're acting is a lot to do with our wounds, right, with our past and how we were parented and or the various relationships or traumatic experiences or even just the ways that we've been shaped by life and love, right? And that so that basically it's kind of this honoring that has help create who we are and what we're bringing to the world, and so we can work with that in a solution-oriented way and say, okay, I can now look at my love wounds as a way to change how I feel and function in the world, right? So it's a linking of that and saying, okay, now we know that for most of us that's a lot of the reasons, but from these ages of love wounds too, right, that our parents had love wounds, their parents, and everybody was really doing their best.
Some were doing their best.
Right, or doing their something, I guess. So I think there's an interesting modernness to this that we're seeing and bringing. That now we know, yes, the dog agrees. Yes. I love how the animals always chime in at the right time. Like, let that shit go, people. And speaking of, actually, I feel like the animals want us to bring up how, because I was thinking also what happens when we don't, quote unquote, heal our love wounds. Like you said, it plays out in our relationships. It also plays out in habits and things we start doing, maybe with even like various addictions we all might have, and even in symptoms in our bodies and stuff too, right? That all these various ways that these wounds kind of get our attention one way or another. And like I feel like we learn from the animals, for instance, how much our bodies are a place that we can tap into these feelings and truths. I know you and I have been really kind of tripping out on that individually along our path on how much the body is this like important part of our sensing and feeling and holds a lot of information and even revelation, and as we're willing to like be with that and allow that, there's a lot that can happen and be learned, right? So again, how interesting how our body is a part of our love wounds and how we're holding them, or how we are and aren't aware of them, and what might happen in our bodies as we're manifesting those love wounds in various ways. So another good reason to clear up our stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so what do you think about some of that with like the body and the love wounds and various things?
Well, the body holds, I go back to the word trauma a lot, but the body holds trauma if it isn't cleared, that energy. And I think that there are so many links to disease and stress, PTSD, which is a, outcome of much trauma, is you don't want to call it a disease, but a condition that that manifests itself so often in the body, with anxiety and whatever symptoms or triggers that does reach persons personally. But there's a link to PTSD and many different forms of disease as well, as worsening or triggering those diseases as well. And I think being able to sit in your body, be in your body, and ground yourself is just so invaluable. And reading your body and its energy. What's happening? I don't feel well. My stomach is in knots. My hands are shaking, or my voice is shaking. And rather than trying to fight against that, feel it. Because you can't get to the root of it until you let yourself feel it.
Yeah, doesn't that seem to be such a truth that I feel like that's fresh in my learning these days?
Yeah.
So maybe it's about like, do you think it's about like getting ourselves to a place where we feel brave enough and strong enough and supported enough and have the tools to go in and allow that can allow that, right? Because I can see for some of us when it's so intense and we haven't been doing it for so long, it can be obviously so scary and hard to start to go there. So, I mean, what has helped you, for instance, get better and more comfortable at letting that happen, you know, and letting yourself feel the really hard stuff as a way to perhaps let it go or resolve it?
Well, you know, for me, I think that forgiveness of self is the most important thing that I've done for myself. You know, when you're standing in judgment of yourself, you expect it from the world. Whereas when you've forgiven yourself for the things that you've done, you know, that perhaps the things that you might have remorse for, when we do that for ourselves, and then you genuinely change behavior that was harmful to self or to others, when we put in that effort, we forgive ourselves, and then we do the work to not be that anymore, it frees us to be who we really are. And at least it does for me. That's for me been the first step, is forgive myself for the times that I've been a neglectful mother or a irresponsible spouse, or, you know, maybe a friend who wasn't a good friend, you know. There's so many places where we can judge ourselves harshly, and when we get caught up beating ourselves up every day over all of those things, we're inflicting even more harm on ourselves. So
right.
I forgive myself. I forgive myself every day for the things that I do, which doesn't mean writing it off and, oh, I'm sorry I did that, and then it happens again, and, oh, I'm sorry I did that. But, you know, really making the change. If I feel sorry, if I need to feel remorse, if I need to feel shame, well, that's something I need to look at in my behavior. And, if I'm not changing that right away, because I don't want to feel that. My body doesn't feel this. It feels this. I listen to it, and energetically, it makes me feel sick. Makes me feel shaky, makes me feel doubtful. Well, none of those feelings serve me or my children or the people who love me or the people that I love.
So I would keep it in check. And so, I'm feeling like I want to know, like, more about what you feel has helped you in actually, like, tangibly forgiving yourself. Like, I know that you use writing and even things like actual rituals and saying, I actually do forgive myself, and adding some of the tools, you know, with that. Or so what do you feel like have been some of those actual ways you've known that you're in the process of forgiving yourself, right? Or even just changing the conversation in your head, you know, or just actually saying affirmations, or, tell me more about what has worked for you, I guess. It sounds interesting.
Writing has been incredibly therapeutic for me. And writing and allowing my writing to be seen was a massive step. You know, I've been writing my entire life for myself, and that's it. And I would actually throw it away, which is so, it makes me so sad now, because I would love to have looked at that path, you know. But I was so critical of myself that I would write, and then I would go back and I would say, oh, I just stupid. Throw it away, and I don't have to look at it or remember it. So writing has been fantastic for me in that I've allowed myself to really express myself, and in ways that maybe I would have been afraid of judgment-wise previously, and now I'm simply not. So that's a big one. My ritual practice is something that has really picked itself up in the last couple of years and been so helpful in grounding and balance in my life, honestly.
And like actually anchoring. I can see how those things would anchor an intention. Like if you've decided and you know it's about forgiving yourself more, that you have these beautiful ways that you bring that to life and like anchor it. You know, like I know my life coaching friends talk about this idea of like anchoring something once you realize it or decide it. And so I can see how those things like your baths or your things by the fire or the various things that you do, probably with your writing too, is a bunch of ritual too, right? Is a way of, and you know what's so interesting with that word resolve that I didn't even realize as I was looking up some of what it said to mean, like when we look at what do we mean by resolving, it does mean like to settle or to find a solution to or to solve, but it also involves this like deciding on a like course of action too, that there's a resolve, right, that comes from resolving or through resolving our loved ones. And so like you were starting to say there, I was really hearing that, and maybe that's part of what we get to do with adding a ritual to something, for instance, is adding that now I've decided it's about self-forgiveness, so how am I going to actually now do that even more firmly as like course of action, you know? So I thought that was interesting, that resolve also means resolve, right? Not just to fix or to heal, but also to now know better and to decide to do something a certain way, and this like intent of purpose now, and this to sort out and to fix, but also to find a solution and to move in a new course of action even. So it's really perfect, right? It involves all of it. So yes, but more about, was there any more about what you feel like has helped you with this actualizing forgiveness of yourself, that where you've actually felt like you do forgive yourself versus just talking about it, right? Because that's one of those things I feel like I've been hearing and thinking for 20 years, but then it's like, but how do we actually do it instead of just like, oh yeah, I really need to forgive myself. That comes, I actually will. Then we have to forgive ourselves for not forgiving ourselves.
There's always something to do. You know, for me, resolve it connects very much with, you know, my rituals would be setting intention, manifestation, and release. All of those are, you know, they come at different times for me based on moon phases and life, children, you know. But something like that for me would look like spending some time writing out, perhaps, for setting intentions. You know, we're talking about forgiving oneself. So setting an intention as to being very clear. I forgive myself for, you know, you don't have to share your story with everyone. You don't. You can choose to, or you can choose to not. You can speak it aloud. You can write it on paper. You just get it out. Get it out and look at it and say it. I forgive myself for X, Y, Z, whatever that is. You know, I would do something like that, and I would also set the intention to look at myself with love. I'm going to look at myself with love. I'm going to look at my body with love. I'm going to, you know, we played that game this weekend, and it touched on something, you know, that I've kind of encompassed in my rituals, but I've since added in, and that was, I pulled a card in the wish game that said gratitude is the attitude of abundance. And it spoke to me so well because, you know, setting the intention to be grateful wherever I am is a big part of loving yourself. You know, it's a lot easier to forgive yourself when you have love for yourself to start. You know, it's easy to tell someone, forgive yourself, and they're like, fuck off, I'm so mad at you. If you just say forgive yourself, I need to take care of myself and love myself. So I'm going to write out those things that I forgive myself for, and I'm going to set the intention to love myself in some small way. You know, I'm going to find something pretty about myself if I pick myself apart physically, or I'm going to find something that I'm good at if I'm hard on myself about what I'm doing with my life, you know. And then I'm going to draw a bath, and I'm going to always add salt to my bath. I use a finely ground pink Himalayan sea salt that I buy in bulk. It is amazing. And then I'll add whatever herbs and oils that I've looked at as to see what works for me. You know, I had a base that I generally work with, like lavender, frankincense, chamomile, cedarwood. All of those are very soothing in a space like that. I'll think in that, light a candle, set that intention in my mind to just warm water is such a great place to ground yourself. The body, remembers the womb. They're safe, it's secure. The body's remembrance energetically remembers that space and where we originally grew from. So remembering that, we were all, just put yourself back into that warm space for a minute.
Literally. I love that. In a bath, you're literally putting yourself in that warm space. Yeah. What a great, I love just the bath. It's such a great example of something that most of us can relate to, something like that, having such a naturally refreshing and refueling aspect, and how it does have this tangible way that you're doing something for yourself that you enjoy. It has, so much to it that is a great example. But I love that you even, I think, bring up that forgiveness, then we can start to see that extends to, like, loving ourselves and then actually looking at what are some things that I can do for myself or add to my days as showing myself that I love myself, right? So it may be the baths and, things like that are the examples of that. So that's, I think that's really helpful. And it reminds me of how, as you were talking about looking at ourselves with love, and I feel like that is such a great way to say it. And isn't that so perfect that our love wounds could even be healed with love? And I'm thinking of, there is one idea that I get from hanging around the Kyle Cease scene with when we're in meditation or just noticing anything about things with ourselves that seem hard to see or feel, that you could literally just say to yourself, and I love that. And he'll kind of talk about not necessarily loving something as a verb, but doing it in a different way. I still actually want to hear more what he means about that. But it's an interesting shift to just kind of say, and I love that, and kind of jokingly, even if you feel like you hate it, as a way to kind of free it up. So once in a while I remember to use that one. And I know for me it has been so helpful to just, and I think you and I resonate on this one, to see that I can be using things that get me in a meditative state, even just kind of sitting comfortably and closing my eyes and just having the space and the time to look at what's going on inside of me from this place of all right, let's kind of take a look. And then I have the kind of more loving approach with even that I love that thing I can use. But what's cool about it, and I was just talking to my friend Stephen, who also was at Kyle Cease and is doing a lot of meditating, that he talked about getting in your heart. And so I think it's kind of neat to see how things like meditation or ways that we feel meditative can get us back into our heart. So it's kind of cool how that may mean, though, listening to what actually is in our heart, right? And that especially when we first start doing it, it may have a lot of the harder, cluttery stuff and all the sensations of that. But, yeah, I'm just amazed at how much it's helping me to just build in more time to do that. Even though I thought I was doing that with things like my journaling and such, suddenly it's really powerful to just sit there and just be with what I'm seeing and feeling. But by the time I'm done, it's like this physical shift where I'm literally feel more in my heart and in my body in a good way. And it's amazing how different I am with everybody else after I've done this stuff, so different. And it really is that it could be as easy as saying in my heart versus in my head, how much of we not in our hearts because it's been a scary, hard place to be, right? Giving ourselves that sweetness, okay, yeah, probably a lot of us have been really disconnected from our hearts and our bodies and our feelings, for good reason, because it's gotten intense and hard, and that just felt easier to disconnect. But now we're seeing the power of reconnecting, right, and actually resolving the stuff as we see it's there. And then how interesting to do that with people we love. How has that changed for you with the people you love? As you see for yourself now that triggers and things are helping you solve your stuff, is it changing how you are watching other people in their process? with knowing that they're going to have their triggers and kind of giving them space for that.
Absolutely. I would say that I've been very lucky in that I was able to have some really amazing cognitive therapy that was also done by a practitioner of craniosacral therapy, and I feel so incredibly blessed. I will be forever grateful for her in my life and for the opportunity to have had that. So that's my first disclaimer, in that I did not do this all by myself, and it's still so in process. But it is, for me, impacted every single relationship in my life. Even those that I don't have anymore, those disconnected relationships from far away. I don't speak to my father, but I don't have any anger either towards my father. So that's a massive thing for me. Was, generally to me, I would have continued that space of, I'm mad at you because I have a right to be mad at you. That righteous indignation, I learned, doesn't really serve me at all. So that's fun. My oldest daughter, it's been amazing to me watching her grow. She's 21 and beautiful and so driven and hardworking, and she grew up with my love wounds unhealed. So, I saw the effect that it had on my daughter, and she had a beautiful life in so many ways, but there's also lots of ways that it could have been a lot better if I had had the tools, and if I'd had the ability to use the tools as well. Things would have absolutely changed. But we went from a very fractured relationship to a much connected and treasured relationship. She's in a space of really working through doing her own personal work, same as I'm doing right now at 42 years old. So, I see the healing and the benefit in having taken care of myself so that I could be a better person to the other people in my life, predominantly my children first and foremost. But, across the board, I've seen healing in beautiful relationships for me, and connections and friendships that have fostered and grown through my growth as well. And, it's only benefited me to get in and resolve these wounds. And in such benefited across the board. Coming from the space of a parent, if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy is sure a true statement, being happy with myself and loving myself and forgiving myself, knowing I'm imperfect but continuing to do work, has balanced me a lot and connected me with my children, with my soon-to-be ex-husband. We have a better relationship than ever now, funnily enough. And, but there are so many people and so many connections that have only been strengthened through my own personal work that I have done and am going to continue to do most likely for the rest of my life. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with doing the work. I see the benefits. I see them so beautifully.
Right. And that's probably important to mention and remember that it's like an onion, that there will always be layers, and that even that's part of being in love relationships now and in the future, is that we're opening our hearts to potential quote-unquote wounds, and not that we're like going to get hurt by other people. Maybe that's like a whole other way of looking at it, that we might get triggered by other people, but that now we can see that that's a chance to heal our relationship with ourselves. And that so I don't know, it's just really interesting to think what's possible in this awareness with like love and relationship and the truths of it, and that it is raw and tender, and that it does still require perhaps this bravery to be open now to new love, even, whether it's with a new friend or a new romantic partner or a new baby in our life, you know,
right.
Or allowing a real shift in a relationship that could feel like the newness, right? Like, oh my gosh, we're seeing so much is possible there. But obviously it has so much to do with our feelings with ourselves, which to me seems, you know, very modern and timely. And even in like a spiritual way, I feel like it's interesting to bring up that maybe a lot of the spiritual systems more than ever are bringing up this idea of like God within or divine, you know, or that we are that. And so it's interesting to bring it back to our relationship with self or like a soul or our heart, and that maybe more than ever we know that as we refine that relationship, you know, that's where it's all stemming from, even though we've thought it's so much about being of service to each other, and we want to be, but it's so clear that how we are with each other is so linked to how we are with ourselves. Right? So it's like we have to go in and do that inner work so that we can be that for the others. And, yes. But it's a continual inner work, and how the others play such a role in the work, right? How our friendships and our love stuff will continue to, quote unquote, trigger us. And that's such a word, and even our kids, right? Like my kids use that word.
Yeah, it's the word
but
of
it's
the
a
year.
good thing to be aware of. Like it's this new level of owning it, that obviously if something bothers you from someone else, it probably has something to do with you and you or something. There's a reason it bothers you, right? And it's bringing up something. So it's just, it's interesting how this opening up can still feel like a rawness and a tenderness and a willingness to keep loving, even as we see all the power and potential and feelings involved, right? Because obviously we see the possibility of some people just shutting down at some point and deciding it's too scary to love
Sometimes
again. And whether with a new animal or a new person, right? Or an old person. And how about the honoring of yourself with that? Like if you
absolutely
if you just know you're not ready to love someone else, you're probably not.
Nope.
And it probably is because you need to learn how to love yourself. You know, it sounds so corny, but it's so true, right? It's so true.
It's not corny at all. It's been around for a long time for a reason.
Right.
You know, but if you love yourself, you will express that love in your interaction with other people. And it produces a like reaction. So I want to think about the way you would want to be loved. If you sit in that for a moment and think, how would I want to be loved? And then you love in that manner, you know, barring doing the work. I know people are going to say, I'm really great to this and this, and they just walk all over me. But, you know, the reality is that being good to someone who's not receiving and being good to you and continuing to do so and then playing the role of a martyr is not self-love by any means. So when you are truly giving to people who are also deserving of what you're giving and reciprocal in that way of balance, you know, I think you get it back for sure. I mean, there's always allowances. Children are children, and you for sure don't get back what you put into children from their behavior or maybe their responses. But, you know, you get it back in who they become and how you're connected with them through life, I would say for certain.
Yeah. And to really know that the more we resolve our stuff, the more clear we can be with them, but they are also going to be part of what helps us resolve our stuff, right?
Oh, man.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're some of our ultimate triggers in the sweetest of ways. But it feels better to own that instead of to blame that on them, that's just part of the deal.
Well, part of that forgiving, it falls into that part of forgiving oneself too, because, the way that works for me with kids and the reality is that it's not easy. Parenting isn't easy, and there are times when it doesn't feel so good, maybe, and the responsibility is incredibly heavy. And I think that part of forgiving oneself is allowing those thoughts and saying this is a normal reaction to yes, a trigger, or yes, a uncomfortable position that one might find oneself in along the roads of parenthood. But the reality is that the connections are so great, and the love is so strong, that the triggering in that for me has allowed so much growth.
Yeah.
So much growth.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so instead of reacting angrily, I'm going to need to ask myself now, why am I angry? What just happened that made what you did make me feel angry? So that's about me. That's about my experience. My reactions are based on my experience in life. So hitting back in there and going, okay, wait a minute. Am I really mad at this particular situation, or am I mad because throughout life situations like this have really not served me and I'm fucking tired of it?
Yeah, right. And that's part of that resolving part is the looking at it, listening to it, and then sometimes often resolving now to do something differently or take some course of action that's even more clear, right? Or just even some different way of being or something with that new level of awareness. Yeah, so it's I love the power of resolve. Oh my God. But there is this like soothing element, almost like that word solve, right? Like, isn't solve also like a type of a ointment or cream kind of thing? Like SALVE? So that's kind of salve. Right. Salve, I guess that's how you say it. So how we have this like soothing element of the resolving. And, I thought something interesting that seems related too with the power of resolving our love wounds and how that can affect our lives and whether we're resolving it or not is how does that also play into like our work in the world and our letting ourselves like move into some of our creations, right? Because we often, there's such a whole bunch of stuff that can come up when we start to move into our work in the world, right? And all the levels of resistance. So how much of our love wounds, I'm thinking, are affecting that too, just our lack of self-esteem or worthiness or all these things that are part of the love wounds that are now not only affecting our relationships, but also affecting our creations, right? And what we're actually doing once we see we want to do it and those kind of things, What do you think about that, the power of how much that affects that in both ways, like how much more we might get into our purpose as we resolve our stuff and how much our stuff might keep us in some weird tangle with our purpose or maybe even keep us so distracted we don't even get to play with that. What do you think about that?
My writing, I used to think that the dark spaces, I have a volume of writing called The Dark Poetry Stories. And, dark being the operative word, they were absolutely that. I felt dark when I wrote them. They came from a dark space. They translate darkly. I love them. I love them. They're the first thing I didn't destroy, even though I do look back and go, girl, man, you were low in that space. But the reality is that I was very low in that space. And for a while, as I was, going through therapy and doing a lot of work on myself, I had a little bit of a fear that I would lose that touch. You hear about the artist, the tortured artist. It's like, well, life has to be tortured to produce art. And, It doesn't. It doesn't have to be Georgia to produce art. The art changes. The art changes. For me, it's gotten a lot lighter. Not so much dark anymore. So there are times, that it still goes to that space. That's just kind of where my writing goes anyway. But letting go of that, for me, letting go of that fear that I wasn't going to be able to write. There were times that I would maybe even push that a little bit to get myself, to creatively flow. Not mindfully, purposefully, but looking back, I go, oh, look at how you created that writing. Look at the path that led to that space, and you resolutely walked down that path. No one pulled you. So, there's been a lot of introspective in that too. But do it for the art, I think can be said so much about the healing ourselves as well, because having confidence to produce, I think it takes a lot of bravery to put your work into the world on any level. Putting yourself out there, is brave. I was very nervous about doing this, not because of any reasons other than that's just, I was the kid in class who would rather take a failing grade than stand up and give a speech in front of the classroom. It's just so weird for me, considering that I love talking to people. But still, love wounds.
And I love what you bring up, though, is actually such the beauty of this whole thing. Like what you illustrate through sharing how your writing of your dark poetry stories was actually a way that you resolved your love wounds. And we have always heard that, right? That that actually can be such a beautiful way to, quote unquote, heal our stuff is through the art. And that actually is the reason a lot of art's even been created, right, is because of people trying to somehow express these feelings. Right? So that's what's so cool for now, maybe us to play with, that often is to kind of the ultimate resolving of our love wounds often becomes the thing that we bring into the world, right? It actually does become that, like as we look at what our specific stuff is, we often resolve it in a way that now becomes something we share with others, right? So that, like the shamanic thing of you went through it yourself in a way, and now you have something to teach. So isn't that so beautiful that the creating of something can be the therapy, and then actually that the something that comes through because of that specific wound, right? So that wound becomes a blessing. Like for me, an example in my life, which is actually a physical example, was, along the path, I was in a car accident that got me in chronic pain, and so wound up getting me to gravitate towards wanting to solve that for myself. And so it became a thing, this is like a tangible example that now I have gotten to do with other people, right, once I learned that for myself. So, and you, through solving your dark feelings actually did create a beautiful volume of poetry that now you're, creating ways to share with the world. So that's so beautiful. But I love what you say, too, that we don't have to feel like we have to, look for the struggle or stay in the challenge in order to stay good artists or something either, and that there has to be some. And we know better than that, don't we, that life is just going to always have its challenge, right? It's not like, I think we've all seen that too, right? There's always something that we're all working with, right? There's always something in life that's challenging us, whether it's on some realm, and to just know that's going to be there no matter what. So we don't have to look for the struggle or even call it a struggle, because we can now see it as something else. But that's so cool, that the resolving of our love wounds, all of the above, that the reason to do it is for the work, but actually the work can be the thing that resolves us, and through resolving us, we actually create our unique work in the world very often, right? Or whatever it is, just a way of understanding life that you wind up sharing with the people around you. It may not be that you write a book because of it, right?
Right.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to see why, if we wanted some spiritual reason for this whole wounding thing going on, instead of being like, oh, poor us, this sucks, that there's this whole wounding thing going on, it's actually kind of cool that it is helping create who we are and what we wind up working with and dealing with and bringing to the world and solving. And so it's just like we're in this like massive experiment with each other.
Totally.
Wow. But lots of quote unquote good coming from it, I guess, huh? So it's worth it to go in with our hearts open and like, okay, let's do this thing. Let's feel this stuff.
we've got to be here anyway. We're doing this life no matter what. We might as well do it happily in love with self and attracting that same sort of love back into our life. But if we can, why not?
Yes, right? Because in all the ways that we can define that word love, and I love how you brought up, too, that even just that word appreciation might be a good substitute feeling that's very similar to love, too, that could actually give us more of like an action feeling, too. Because love sometimes is such a mixed word that when we think about loving things, but maybe that's also nice for us to remember that love includes all the feelings, right? It's not just a happy skipping with your hands held feeling either. That love includes all the feelings.
All the feels. All of them.
And that it's pretty cool if we can find a way to get back to feeling like we can enjoy feeling all the feelings and allow that for others. Yeah, that maybe that's what loving could be, like holding the space for that for us all. It's better to me.
I love that. Holding space. I love, holding space for oneself. We talk about holding space for other people all the time, but, there's something to be said for holding space for yourself.
Yes. And that seems like a kind of underlying theme of our resolving our love wounds is basically, yes, be ready to hold space for yourself. Like if there was any new advice here or some advice coming through, it's like that holding space for yourself is going to be part of this and how all the ways you can play with that.
Brene Brown said something once that has stuck with me. I'm sure she said it more than once, actually. But it stunned me, and it was, you can only love others as much as you love yourself.
Yeah, so that's the ultimate reason, and it's like it's so clear now that we might as well just function from that and
might as well. I love it. That's the motto. Let it
go. Might as well. Gosh. Well, that feels like I think it's been just about an hour. Do you feel like there's anything else you want to add to this as we might start to call it towards a close?
No, not at all. I think that, it's been fun starting at the base of it and getting a little bit deeper into sending that out there. Thank you for asking me.
Yes. Yeah, really fun to drop in and just be in timeless awareness and see what came through. So, well, thank you so much, and thank you to you who are still listening, and we appreciate you dropping in with us as we play with some of these ideas. So I might list some things like you mentioned, the 4 agreements in our conversation, and as we listen back over, if there's any other resources we feel like we want to add to our info that we add to this audio, then we can. So awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
And yes, until we all meet again, may we, keep being in that love space, and play with the power of resolve. Okay. Adios. Namaste.